Today's lesson is going to be from Chapter 2, Thinking Like an Economist, and it's going to focus on the production possibility frontier model. It's a model that is pretty important in this class, and it reflects the concepts we learned in Chapter 1 about scarcity, opportunity cost, trade-offs, and ultimately what you give up whenever you produce one good versus another. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a look at the PowerPoint together, and I'm going to kind of do a voiceover on it. And then what I would like you guys to do is to have your notes and kind of be going along with it, and you'll take the follow-up quiz afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to open up the PowerPoint right now and give you an introduction to the production possibility frontier model. All right, so this particular model comes from Chapter 2, Thinking Like an Economist. And as I said in class, the design of this chapter is to get you used to the language, the overall way of thinking, if you will, that economists use to analyze decision making. So the production possibility frontier model is one way that we can understand how people have to give up something to get something else. Alright, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Production possibility frontier model. First and foremost, a production possibility model shows how when we transfer resources from one good, we have to give up some of the other good. So in class, what we did is we had a little activity where you had the opportunity to produce either smiles, if you remember, or these links. Okay, and we created kind of like a chain of links. And if we put all our resources towards the production of smiles, what you found out in class is that your resources, that is your land, labor, capital, allowed you to produce 32 smiles. But of course the sacrifice, the trade-off here was that you could produce no links. And then if we sort of transferred our resources, we allocated all our resources towards links, that then we could produce 32 links, right? We had the opportunity to do that. But the trade-off was that we'd give up the opportunity to produce any smiles. Okay, so typically when you look at a PPF or production possibility frontier, what you have is you have a kind of a curve, and I'll show you in a second some of the different shapes of the curves, but you have a curve, and it doesn't have to be necessarily as linear as we did it in class or as I have here. But what this curve is really based upon is a bunch of little points, a bunch of little trade-off points. For instance, if I wanted to, let's say, produce an equal amount of links and smiles like we saw in class, well, I know that my resources allowed me to produce 16 smiles and then 16 links, and that of course would be based on the trade-off of a proportional, even trade-off between the two. Okay, so anyway, let me kind of get out of this here for a second. Alright, so the production possibility model, again, it illustrates the idea of trade-offs and opportunity costs. And that's what we're going to look at in this online lesson. Alright, production possibility models, they have different shapes. The first shape, that if we just look at a basic idea behind production of an individual, like this person here has an opportunity to either work or play, okay, and they've got 1 hour worth of time to make their choices. So an individual production possibility frontier factors in or deals with individual trade-offs. If this person chooses to spend all their time working, well, then they have no play time. If they choose to spend all their time playing, then they have no ability to earn money or to work. And they, of course, could split their time half and half here. Oftentimes what we see with individual production possibility models is that you have this linear shape to the curve. So the shape tends to be linear because it's proportional trade-off. If I get one, I give up the other. Or if I give up half of one, I give up half of the other. Again, it's proportional. So the idea of a proportional trade-off is that we're going to have this sort of one-for-one, if you will, linear curve. But the thing is that society and most economies are not really like this. Most economies, we tend to be better at one particular item than the other, producing one versus the other. So you can see here, if we take the classic example of the production possibility model on a social level. So what we have here is a non-proportional trade-off between your classic example in a social trade-off between guns and butter. Okay, so if we look at this production possibility model, this graph, this economy is clearly better at producing butter than it is at guns. When it puts all its resources towards producing butter, it can produce 1,000 butter. When it produces all guns, it can produce 200, or some combination in between. So why does this thing bow outwards like this? We'll talk about that in a second, but you can see the opportunity cost of producing, let's say, 20 guns. If I produce 20 guns, I can no longer produce 1,000 butter, I can only produce 900. And so what happens is I give up 100 butter, if you will. So the shape of the curve with the production possibility frontier on a social level is generally bowed outwards. The reason for this is what we call the law of increasing opportunity costs. What that means is that as I produce 1 unit, or in this case 20 units of one product, I actually end up giving up more and more and more of the other product. Think about it. If we're better at producing butter, then that must mean it's easier to produce butter. So in the first 20 guns that I produce, it cost me 100 butter. The next 160 guns I produce, or if I'm producing a total of 180 guns, it's costing me 900 butter. Again, as I produce more along this axis, I have to continually give up more and more and more of this axis. Just kind of think of it as I'm taking the resources that I would usually use to produce butter and I'm putting them towards guns. Another way of thinking about it is that sometimes our resources are more geared towards one thing versus another in an economy. It's just kind of the way things work. So some resources are specialized. In this case, we're more specialized towards consumer goods versus military goods, the classic example of guns and butter. Okay, so here's another example. You can see here that we have pizza and robots. Over here on this axis, pizza, on this robots. As I produce my first robot, I give up about 1 pizza. When I produce that second robot, I'm actually giving up more pizza than I did for that first robot. That's the law of increasing opportunity cost. So now I'm actually giving up 4 pizzas. But because society may need this, we have to take more and more of our pizza makers to create that next unit of robots. Look at from 2 to 3 at the margin. As I produce 1 more robot at this margin, I end up giving up 15 pizzas. I go from 25 to 10. And so again, this is this idea of the law of increasing opportunity costs. Let's just talk about generally what the production possibility model shows us. The production possibility model shows us, what is it? Again, the PPC model and the production possibility frontier, if you will, model shows us the possible combinations of what can be produced by an individual, a business, a firm, or a society. What does it show? Nothing's free. Everything has a cost, an opportunity cost. If society wants to produce more of one thing, they have to give up the other thing. When we produce more of one thing, we must give up more of the other. So if we think about the production possibility model, the production possibility frontier, production possibility curve, which are synonymous, it can be used to show several things. First of all, this fundamental concept of scarcity, that we have limited resources and unlimited wants. Every time we produce something or we make a decision in light of scarcity, there's a trade-off. We see the choice that we can make between one good versus another. Whatever we choose to produce has a cost, and that's called opportunity cost. Additionally, we can also see 3 fundamental important things about this model and about society. Number 1, how do we experience economic growth? Number 2, how do we experience efficiency, or what is efficiency? In other words, where do we see efficiency on this model when all of our resources are being used as wisely as possible? And number 3, what happens on this model when we have unemployment? Each of those things, these 6 bullet points in the bottom 3, are very important about this model. And we'll talk more about this tomorrow in class. So your first lesson here on the production possibility model was designed just to give you an introduction. It's going to connect to your in-class activity. And so right now what I want you to do is go ahead and log in to my website and take the quiz that accompanies this particular section, this lesson.